What if the secrets of the universe were hidden in a boiling flask? What if gold was not just a metal, but a key to something far greater than riches? In the dusty, smoke-filled workshops of 14th century Europe, some people dedicated their lives to finding out. Number 6. The Grand Alchemists' Legacy. The air in the chamber felt different now. It was not thick with the acrid fumes of 1,000 failed experiments, nor did it echo with the frantic clatter of apparatus. A sense of calm, almost an ancient stillness, settled upon the space. Grand Alchemist, now aged, his hands bearing the indelible marks of countless hours handling acids and flames, looked upon the final vessel. This was not the chaotic array of a beginner's lab, but a sanctuary where years of dedication had culminated. The great work, the magnum opus, was not merely a set of procedures, but a life lived in relentless pursuit of knowledge, a journey that had reshaped the alchemist's very being. This was the stage rarely spoken of in hushed tones, the destination often dreamed but seldom reached. It was not about a single dramatic explosion or a sudden flash of gold. It was about the slow, deliberate unfolding of understanding, a culmination of all the stages that came before. The alchemist had moved beyond the mere preparation of substances. They had begun to truly comprehend the hidden connections between matter and spirit, between the visible world and the invisible forces that governed it. Historical accounts speak of figures like Nicolas Flamel, a real person from 14th century Paris who was rumored to have achieved the Philosopher's Stone, while many modern historians suggest he was a wealthy scribe who invested in land and property. The enduring legend of his success captures the essence of this final stage. The story goes that Flamel studied a mysterious ancient book for decades, unlocking its secrets of transmutation and longevity. Whether this was true or a myth, the legend itself provided a powerful narrative for those striving in their own labs. It spoke of a profound wisdom, not just chemical prowess. The alchemist at this stage often took on students, passing down the esoteric knowledge gained over a lifetime. This was not a formal classroom setting with textbooks and lectures. Instead, it was a practical apprenticeship, where the master guided the apprentice through hands-on work, offering cryptic insights and challenging their perceptions. The Grand Alchemist might point to a specific reaction in a flask, and without explaining the why, simply state its connection to a celestial body or a human emotion. The apprentice had to grasp the deeper implication themselves. The Rosarium Philosophorum, a key alchemical text from the 16th century, often depicted symbolic images rather than explicit instructions, implying that the true understanding came from inward contemplation and guidance from a master, not from a simple reading. Writing treatises and codifying knowledge became an important task. These weren't just instruction manuals. They were often dense, metaphorical works, filled with allegories and symbols that only a seasoned alchemist could decipher. Roger Bacon, a Franciscan friar and scholar from the 13th century, is often associated with early alchemical writings, emphasizing observation and experimentation even if his specific alchemical works are debated. His writings, though, reflected a desire to systematically record knowledge. Al-Razi, a Persian polymath who lived in the 9th and 10th centuries, wrote extensively on chemical processes and substances, providing detailed descriptions that were far more practical than many later European alchemical texts. His writings sometimes read like scientific manuals, detailing distillation, calcination, and crystallization. However, even these practical descriptions were often imbued with deeper, unspoken alchemical significance. The Grand Alchemist's personal laboratory often contained instruments crafted with exceptional precision, reflecting a lifetime of refinement. The furnaces were masterpieces of heat control, the glass retorts blown with an artisan's touch, the crucibles capable of withstanding extreme temperatures. These tools were no longer mere instruments. They were extensions of the alchemist's will, conduits for the transformation they sought to achieve. Each retort, each alembic, had witnessed countless hours of patient labor and held the memory of experiments successful and otherwise. This stage also involved a profound philosophical shift. The alchemist no longer saw the philosopher's stone as simply a means to earthly wealth or immortality, but as a symbol of spiritual perfection, a union of opposites, and a complete understanding of nature's processes. The quest for gold became a metaphor for the purification of the soul. The ability to transmute base metals into noble ones was seen as an outward manifestation of an inward transformation. The Emerald Tablet, a short cryptic text revered by alchemists, spoke of that which is above is as that which is below, suggesting a deep connection between the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, humanity and the alchemical process. For the grand alchemist, this was not just a theory, it was the lived reality. The alchemist at this stage might have spent hours in contemplation, observing the subtle shifts in the colors of a substance as it heated, listening to the gentle gurgle of a distillation, or simply sitting in silence allowing the principles of nature to unfold in their mind. The physical work continued, but it was accompanied by a deep inner quietude. They understood that the physical transformations were merely reflections of deeper, universal laws. Some alchemists at this stage were said to have become reclusive, guarding their secrets closely. Others, like the mythical Nicolas Flamel, were said to have used their acquired wisdom for benevolent purposes, contributing to society in unseen ways. The choice was personal, reflecting the individual's own journey and understanding of their profound knowledge. The legacy of the grand alchemist was not measured by outward achievements or public fame, but by the subtle, lasting impact they had on the unfolding tapestry of esoteric knowledge and the whispers of wonder they left behind. Number 5. The Master's Vision. The subtle scent of sulfur, earthy and sharp, hung in the air. Crackle of the furnace, a constant companion, now seemed to beat in rhythm with the alchemist's own pulse. At this stage, the journey shifted profoundly. It was no longer just about the precise measurements, the careful heating, or the meticulous grinding of substances. It was about seeing beyond the immediate chemical reactions, about understanding the deeper philosophical currents flowing beneath the surface of the physical world. This was where the alchemists began to truly embody the title of Master. They had wrestled with the practical challenges, navigated the confusing symbolism, and endured countless failures. Now a new kind of insight began to emerge. The alchemists started to perceive the cosmos reflected in their retorts, the celestial dance mirrored in the bubbling liquids. They understood that the substances they worked with, mercury, sulfur, salt, were not just elements, but powerful symbols representing universal principles: spirit, soul, and body, or volatility, fixity, and stability. Historical texts, from figures like Zosimos of Panopolis, an alchemist from the 3rd and 4th centuries, often included symbolic visions and dreams alongside practical instructions. Zosimos' writings describe being visited by figures like Ion the priest, who is sacrificed and transformed, echoing the alchemical processes of death and rebirth that substances undergo. These visions weren't random fantasies. They were believed to be integral to understanding the alchemical process, linking the physical work to spiritual and cosmic events. The master alchemists spent long hours in contemplation, often in the dead of night, illuminated only by the flickering light of a candle or the steady glow of the furnace. They might meditate on the cryptic verses of the Emerald Tablet, turning its phrases over and over in their mind. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently, and with great ingenuity. This was not just a practical instruction for distillation. It was a philosophical guideline for purifying the soul, separating wisdom from ignorance. Their library grew, not just with more treatises, but with works on astronomy, philosophy, theology, and ancient mythology. Alchemists believed these seemingly disparate fields were all interconnected, forming a single, unified body of knowledge. They studied the movements of the planets, believing that celestial influences affected terrestrial reactions. A favorable planetary alignment, they thought, could enhance the success of a complex operation. Works by scholars like Albertus Magnus, a Dominican friar and philosopher from the 13th century, discussed minerals and metals within a larger cosmological framework, connecting their properties to planetary influence. The master no longer relied solely on inherited recipes or the strict instructions of their former mentor. They began to interpret the complex alchemical allegories independently, drawing their own connections between the processes in the flask and the cycles of nature, the stages of human life, or the divine creation. The Mutus Liber, or Silent Book, an alchemical text from the 17th century, is composed entirely of enigmatic engravings without text, forcing the viewer to interpret the process through observation and intuition alone. This embodied the kind of visual, intuitive understanding cultivated at this stage. Experiments at this level were less about achieving a specific outcome and more about observing the subtle shifts, the minute changes in color, texture, and state, and understanding their deeper significance. The alchemist might dedicate weeks to a single slow sublimation process, observing the crystal's form, believing that each crystal was a manifestation of a universal principle. Patience required was immense, not merely a physical endurance, but a mental and spiritual quietude that allowed for profound observation. The understanding of philosophical mercury and philosophical sulfur deepened. These were not just the elements mercury and sulfur as found in nature, but universal principles representing the fluid, volatile, feminine aspect, mercury, and the fixed, fiery, masculine aspect, sulfur. The master's vision saw these principles at work everywhere, not just in the laboratory, but in the world, in human relationships, in the growth of plants, and in the movement of the stars. The aim was to unite these principles in perfect balance, mirroring the creation of the universe itself. Failures, which were plentiful even at this advanced stage, were no longer crushing disappointments, but learning opportunities. A shattered retort or a failed coagulation was seen as a chance to understand the true nature of matter, the stubbornness of imperfection, and the need for greater refinement, both of the materials and of the alchemist's own understanding. The master would analyze the reasons for failure, not just chemically, but philosophically, reflecting on whether their own approach or mindset had been out of alignment with the natural forces at play. The sounds of the laboratory, the gentle simmer of the alembic, the steady hum of the furnace, the clink of glass, became a kind of symphony, each note contributing to the alchemist's growing comprehension of the universe. They were no longer just performing operations, they were participating in a grand cosmic drama, their actions in the lab reflecting the deep hidden processes of creation and transformation that occurred throughout the universe. This was the stage where the alchemists began to truly feel themselves a part of the grand tapestry of existence, woven into its very fabric. Number 4. The Adept's Trials. The workshop hummed with a different energy now. The basic skills were second nature. The theoretical texts had been devoured. This was the point of no return, where the true tests began. This was the stage of the adept, where the alchemist moved beyond foundational learning and embarked on more complex, often frustrating practical challenges designed to achieve the great work in miniature. These were not mere exercises. They were trials demanding immense patience, keen observation, and an unwavering spirit. One of the central trials involved the regimen of colors, a series of distinct color changes that alchemists believed indicated progress in the great work. The initial stage was often described as the blackening or nigredo, where substances were decomposed and purified through putrefaction. The alchemist might spend weeks, even months, carefully heating a mixture of prepared materials in a sealed flask, watching for the blackness to appear. The smell during this stage could be intensely unpleasant, a mix of decay and chemical fumes, a stark reminder of the death of the initial material. Gaber or Jabir ibn Hayyan, a legendary figure in Islamic alchemy, described various forms of decomposition and purification processes in his numerous treatises, all designed to prepare substances for later transformations. This stage involved further purification, often through repeated distillation or washing, where the black substance gradually turned white, like the pure, unblemished color of snow. The alchemist would painstakingly separate liquids, collect pristine precipitates, and refine the substance through multiple cycles. Each droplet that distilled was a testament to their perseverance. Medieval alchemists like Raymond Lull, though many alchemical works attributed to him are considered pseudo-Lull, often wrote about the importance of these purifications, seeing them as essential steps towards the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. The adept's laboratory would be filled with more specialized apparatus. The alembic, a distillation device with a distinctive cap and a tube for condensation, became a constant companion. Multi-chambered furnaces, called atheners, were used to maintain steady, prolonged heat over many days or weeks, requiring constant tending of the fire. The alchemist learned to read the subtle changes in the flame, adjusting the airflow or adding fuel to keep the temperature just right. Temperature control was critical, often requiring a deep understanding of how different substances reacted at specific heat levels. The reddening or rubedo was the final color change, signifying the nearing completion of the process. This stage involved the substance turning a vibrant red, sometimes described as the color of a poppy or a ruby. This was believed to be the point where the Philosopher's Stone was nearing its perfection, imbued with potent transforming power. Achieving this color was a rare and celebrated event, often after years of effort. Texts like the Aurora Consurgens, an alchemical treatise often attributed to Thomas Aquinas, though debated, use vivid imagery of the Red King or red tincture to describe this ultimate stage. Failure was an integral, inevitable part of this stage. A sudden burst of heat could shatter a glass retort, turning weeks of careful work into a dangerous mess. An impure substance could contaminate an entire batch, forcing the alchemist to start from the very beginning. The smell of burnt chemicals, the sight of ruined precipitates, the feeling of despair after a promising experiment turned sour. These were common experiences. Yet, the adept learned from each setback, meticulously noting down what went wrong, cross-referencing their notes with ancient texts and adjusting their methods. They understood that every failure brought them closer to understanding the true nature of matter and the limits of their own skill. The alchemist also tackled the problem of fixing volatile substances. Mercury, for example, was known for its liquid, elusive nature. The goal was to render it solid and stable, to make the fugitive remain. This process of fixing was often described as uniting the volatile, mercury, with the fixed, sulfur or gold, a marriage of opposites. This was a core alchemical problem, requiring intricate procedures of sublimation, calcination, and amalgamation. Pseudo-Gebers, Summa Perfectionis Magisteri, provided detailed instructions on how to manipulate mercury and other metals, even if its ultimate goal was not just gold, but philosophical understanding. The adept also experimented with specific preparations, such as the dragon's blood, a common term for cinnabar, mercury sulfide, or various types of magistries, purified and powerful forms of substances believed to have special properties. They meticulously recorded every step, every minute change, every perceived influence, hoping to uncover the precise conditions that led to success. Their journals, often filled with cryptic symbols and personal observations, became invaluable guides for future attempts. The work was often solitary, demanding immense mental and physical endurance. The days were long, The nights spent tending fires, stirring mixtures, and observing subtle reactions. Sleep was often sacrificed. The light from the furnace illuminated the alchemist's strained face, reflecting a deep, unwavering determination. This relentless pursuit, despite constant setbacks, shaped the adept, instilling a level of resilience and observational skill that few others possessed. They were not merely seeking to make gold, they were engaged in a profound process of self-refinement, mirroring the purification of the substances in their flasks. Number 3. The Journeyman's Quest. The apprentice had proven their hands were steady, their furnaces well tended. Now the true intellectual journey began. The journeyman's quest was not just about more advanced techniques, but about plunging headfirst into the dense, often bewildering world of alchemical theory, symbolism, and ancient texts. The workshop still called, but the library, or more accurately the master's private collection of scrolls and codices, beckoned just as strongly. This was the time for deep study, for deciphering the cryptic language used by alchemists of old. Texts like the Emerald Tablet, a short, profound piece attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, became central. Its lines, such as "that which is above is as that which is below, and that which is below is as that which is above," to accomplish the miracles of the one thing, were endlessly pondered. This was not a straightforward scientific instruction. It was a philosophical declaration that implied a profound connection between the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, the human being and the alchemical process. The alchemists believed understanding this mirrored harmony was key to their work. They delved into the writings of Zosimos of Panopolis, an early alchemist whose works often included allegorical visions, dreams, and dialogues with mythical figures. Zosimos's texts were not simply recipes, they were narratives of transformation, often involving a psychological or spiritual element. Reading Zosimos, the journeyman began to see the alchemical process as a profound journey of death and rebirth, mirroring both chemical decomposition and spiritual purification. The ancient parchment itself, brittle and smelling of age, felt like a direct link to those who walked this path centuries before. The influence of Islamic scholars was keenly felt. Works attributed to Geber, Jabir ibn Hayyan, were especially crucial. Geber's writings, such as the Book of the Composition of Alchemy, introduced a sophisticated understanding of substances, particularly mercury and sulfur, as the fundamental constituents of metals. He detailed various chemical operations, like calcination, distillation, sublimation, and crystallization with a level of precision not commonly seen in earlier European texts. The journeyman pored over these descriptions, attempting to replicate the processes, meticulously noting down the specific amounts, temperatures, and durations, all while struggling to reconcile the practical advice with the often vague philosophical pronouncements. The theory of opposites became a core concept. Alchemists believed the universe was born from the struggle and eventual union of opposing forces: hot and cold, wet and dry, male and female, spirit and matter. In the laboratory, this translated to understanding the volatile, mercury, and the fixed, sulfur, the acidic and the alkaline. The ultimate goal was to bring these opposites into perfect harmony, achieving a unified, perfected state, just as gold was considered a perfect metal. The alchemist observed the violent reactions of acids and bases, the furious bubbling, the generation of heat. Understanding these as a miniature representation of cosmic forces at play, symbolism became a second language. The serpent eating its tail, Ouroboros, represented cyclical processes and endless transformation. The sun and moon symbolized gold and silver, or the philosophical mercury and sulfur, or male and female principles. The dragon, a chaotic, untamed creature, often represented the prima materia, the raw, undifferentiated substance at the beginning of the great work. The alchemists began to see these symbols everywhere, in their apparatus, in the colors of their reactions, even in their own dreams. The Rosarium Philosophorum, a popular 16th century text, used a sequence of 20 woodcut illustrations to depict the alchemical process symbolically, focusing on the sacred marriage of opposing principles. The journeyman also studied the works of scholastic philosophers like Albertus Magnus, who in the 13th century categorized minerals and metals based on their properties and planetary associations. These texts provided a bridge between the physical world of substances and the metaphysical world of astrology and cosmology. The alchemist was not just a chemist. They were a natural philosopher attempting to understand the entire universe through the lens of transmutation. The quest for knowledge was not linear. The journeyman might spend weeks on a single passage from an ancient text, trying to understand its true meaning. They would cross-reference different treatises, compare conflicting descriptions, and seek out interpretations from their master or other learned individuals. Discrepancies and contradictions were common, forcing the alchemists to develop their own critical thinking skills, to discern the true path amidst a labyrinth of obscure pronouncements. The frustration of misunderstanding, of feeling lost in a sea of metaphor, was a constant companion. This intense study often led to moments of sudden insight, a flash of understanding where a previously obscure passage suddenly made perfect sense. It was like unlocking a secret code, revealing a deeper layer of meaning to the seemingly chaotic processes in the laboratory. The faint smell of burning parchment, the quiet rustle of turning pages, the steady drip of the hourglass marking the passage of time, these were the sensory backdrop to this profound intellectual journey. The journeyman was not just learning to do alchemy. They were learning to think alchemically, to see the world through the eyes of the wise. Number 2. The apprentice. The initial awe of entering a true alchemist's workshop slowly gave way to the gritty reality of daily labor. This was the stage of the apprentice, a period of relentless physical work, practical lessons, and developing the essential skills that would form the bedrock of all future alchemical endeavors. It was less about grand philosophical concepts and more about mastering the tools, understanding the materials, and learning the rhythms of the laboratory. The first lesson was often fire. The apprentice learned to build, tend, and control the furnace. This was no simple campfire. Alchemical furnaces, often called athanors, were sophisticated structures designed to maintain precise, consistent temperatures for days, weeks, or even months. The apprentice learned to recognize the different heats, the gentle warmth for digestion, the steady glow for distillation, the roaring inferno for calcination. The smell of burning charcoal, the feel of the radiant heat on their skin, the visual cues of a perfectly burning fire, these became second nature. Constant watch was necessary. A furnace left unattended could ruin an experiment, or worse, ignite the workshop. Next came the materials. The apprentice learned to identify, collect, and prepare the raw substances. This might involve collecting dew at specific times of the night, identifying particular herbs in the wild, or acquiring minerals from local mines or apothecaries. They learned the properties of common metals like lead, tin, copper, iron, and silver, understanding their different reactions to heat and acids. They handled mercury, its cool, fluid weight, a constant fascination, and sulfur, with its distinctive pungent odor when heated. The alchemist's workshop often smelled of a bewildering mix of earthy minerals, sharp acids, and sometimes the sweet, sickly scent of decay necessary for certain putrefaction processes. Grinding was a fundamental skill. Substances like minerals or dried herbs had to be reduced to the finest possible powder, using mortars and pestles, often made of durable stone or iron. This was arduous work, requiring immense patience and physical stamina. Hours could be spent meticulously grinding, ensuring the powder was uniform, as any impurity or unevenness could ruin a sensitive reaction. The repetitive motion, the dust that settled on everything, and the ache in the arms were constant reminders of the diligence required. Distillation became a core practice. The apprentice learned to set up the alembic, a glass still with a condenser and a receiver. They would distill various liquids, water, alcohol, often starting with wine or even urine, observing how vapors rose, condensed, and dripped into the collecting flask. They learned the difference between the spirit, the volatile essence, and the body, the remaining solid. The sound of bubbling liquid, the gentle condensation on the cool glass, the steady drip of the distillate into the receiver. These were the sounds of progress, slow and deliberate. Medieval alchemists like Geber or Pseudo-Geber, a collection of Latin texts, provided practical instructions on distillation, though often mixed with cryptic language. Calcination, the process of heating a substance to a high temperature to remove volatile components and reduce it to a powder or ash, was another crucial skill. The apprentice might calcine metals, herbs, or salts, watching as they changed color and texture, transforming from their original state into a fine, often inert, residue. This process was believed to purify the substance, preparing it for further operations. The intense heat, the glowing embers, the slow transformation of matter, it was a visceral experience. The apprentice also learned about acids and alkalis, often called waters by alchemists. They learned to prepare strong solvents, sometimes by distilling vinegar or by collecting rainwater. They learned the dangers of handling these corrosive liquids, the importance of ventilation, and the need for careful measurement. A single drop of acid could etch through surfaces or cause a violent reaction if mishandled. The sting of minor burns, the sudden fuming of a mishandled chemical, were harsh but effective teachers. Cleaning the glassware was a constant, never-ending chore. Retorts, alembics, receivers, and flasks had to be spotlessly clean, free from any residue that could contaminate future experiments. This involved tedious scrubbing with sand or strong lye, followed by repeated rinsing. The feeling of perfectly clean, sparkling glass, ready for a new operation, was a small victory in itself. This stage was filled with trial and error. The apprentice might accidentally overheat a flask, shattering it and ruining hours of work. They might mismeasure an ingredient, leading to an unexpected, useless sludge. The master would observe, sometimes offer a terse correction, sometimes allow the apprentice to learn from their own mistakes. The feeling of frustration, of having failed despite diligent effort, was common. Yet, it was through these failures that true resilience and practical wisdom were forged. The apprentice's daily routine was repetitive, demanding, and often isolating. They spent hours alone in the workshop, tending fires, grinding substances, watching liquids distill. The sounds of the laboratory, the hiss of the furnace, the clink of glassware, the faint bubbling of the concoction became the soundtrack to their life. This relentless toil was not seen as a burden, but as a necessary purification, a preparation of the body and mind, just as the substances themselves were purified for the great work. Number 1. The aspirant's awakening. The world outside bustled with the predictable rhythms of medieval life. Blacksmiths hammering, merchants hawking their wares, church bells tolling the hours. But for a select few, a different kind of call echoed, a whisper of hidden knowledge of secrets waiting to be unlocked. This was the aspirant's awakening, the very first stage where a person felt an irresistible pull towards alchemy, often sparked by a chance encounter, a cryptic text, or a deep, unshakable curiosity about the universe's most profound mysteries. Perhaps it was a book stumbled upon in a dusty monastery library or acquired from a traveling scholar that spoke of turning base metals into gleaming gold. It might have been a rumor, a hushed story of a mysterious practitioner who possessed the power to heal all ailments or extend life indefinitely. Or perhaps it was an innate sense of wonder, a feeling that the visible world held deeper truths, that matter itself was alive with hidden potential. This initial spark was often intuitive, a yearning for something more than what conventional knowledge offered. The legends surrounding the philosopher's stone, the mythical substance said to confer immortality and transmute metals, were powerful lures. While modern historians largely see alchemy as a precursor to chemistry, to a medieval mind, it was a legitimate, if often secret, philosophical pursuit. The promise of wealth was certainly attractive, but for many, the deeper draw was the promise of understanding the fundamental nature of creation, of mastering the very forces of nature. The idea that common lead could be transformed into perfect gold suggested that perfection was attainable, not just in metals, but in life itself. The first step for an aspiring alchemist was often a search for a mentor. Alchemy was not learned in public universities. It was a closely guarded tradition, passed down from master to apprentice. The search could be long and frustrating. Many charlatans claimed alchemical knowledge, eager to exploit the eager and naive. The true alchemists were often reclusive, their workshops hidden, their identities shrouded in secrecy, to avoid persecution from authorities who viewed their practices with suspicion or from envious rivals. An aspirant might travel far, following faint leads, asking discreet questions in scholarly circles or among those who dealt in unusual materials. They might offer their services as a humble assistant, hoping to gain access to a master's knowledge. The commitment required was immense, often involving leaving behind a conventional life, family, and social standing. The journey itself was a test of dedication and perseverance, weeding out the merely curious from those truly driven. Once an aspiring alchemist found a potential master, they often had to undergo a period of probation. This wasn't about performing complex experiments. It was about demonstrating sincerity, trustworthiness, and intellectual aptitude. The master might assign mundane tasks, ask philosophical questions, or simply observe the aspirant's character. This stage was about assessing the aspirant's purity of intention, their ability to keep secrets, and their capacity for patience, qualities essential for the long, arduous road ahead. The aspirant might spend hours poring over rudimentary texts, often copies of copies, filled with vague metaphors and symbolic drawings. They might encounter references to figures like Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary Hellenistic figure considered the father of alchemy, and various esoteric doctrines. The emerald tablet, traditionally attributed to Hermes, would become a foundational, though deeply perplexing text. Its short, cryptic lines would be memorized, pondered, but far from fully understood. The early intellectual pursuits of an aspirant also included learning the basic elements and their qualities as understood in medieval natural philosophy: earth, cold and dry; water, cold and wet; air, hot and wet; and fire, hot and dry. They would begin to grasp how these elements were thought to combine to form all matter, and how manipulating them was central to alchemical processes. Concept of the prima materia, the undifferentiated primal substance from which all things were believed to originate, would be introduced often in deeply mystical terms. The initial experiences in a true alchemical workshop, for those fortunate enough to gain access, were often overwhelming. The smells, a mix of sulfur, volatile chemicals, and burning charcoal, were intense. The sight of strange glass, retorts, bubbling mixtures over roaring furnaces, and enigmatic symbols etched on walls would be both thrilling and intimidating. The aspirant would feel the heat from the furnaces, hear the gentle hiss of chemicals reacting, and witness the meticulous, often slow pace of the master's work. This awakening was not a single moment, but a gradual realization. Was the moment a person committed their life to the great work, not yet fully understanding its scope or its demands, but driven by an undeniable desire to uncover the deepest truths of the universe. It was the first step on a journey that would reshape their understanding of matter, spirit, and themselves.